And welcome to what is officially week 4, but we've kind of dragged it out a little bit, and I think it's actually been a good thing that we've dragged it out a little bit. It gives us a little bit more time, which never seems like it's enough, does it? No. All right, so with that being said, if we don't get through every single thing in today's lesson, I'm not going to kill myself over it because it is what it is, but if we can get done, that'll be great too. But last week we did the last half of the week 3 lesson, and of course we have homework from that. And for last week, we did problems 6 through 10, and then we also did a couple down at the bottom, some of the reading assignments and whatnot. But we will start with problem 6. Problem 6 says, based on your previous answer, and the previous answer was the one, well, could you figure out, 5 English words that have shifted in meaning over time, yada, yada. So based on your previous answer, is the definition of harmartia that was current around 450 BC relevant to its meaning in the Septuagint or the New Testament? Why or why not? Thoughts on that one? Yes? Yeah.
I said it's not relevant.
Okay, it's not relevant, and then why?
It is not relevant because what we understand that is concrete at this point is from the Septuagint and forward. Did I get that right?
That's probably not how I would have said it. Rephrase that for me. What's another way that you could say that?
I can't get it out of my head. It's stuck in there.
That is a problem sometimes. There are no words. Yeah.
Well, that was deeper than I was thinking. So I think you should get the gold star for that answer.
I have something down.
Yeah, I have a blank spot.
All right, so maybe first thing, a little bit of a timeline issue. Does anyone remember when the translation of the Septuagint was begun?
It was like 100. Is it 100 BC or something like that?
We do have manuscripts from that time period, but the translation actually happened a bit earlier than that.
Earlier, like in maybe 200 BC? Am I going the right direction?
Yeah, it was 3rd century, 2nd century BC when that started.
Okay.
All right, so that's the Septuagint time frame. New Testament, most of us already know.
Can we pause for a second? Because should I already know what the Septuagint is? Is that something we've discussed?
We have discussed, yeah. Yeah.
You know what? She wasn't there the first time.
That's true. She wasn't there the first time. The Septuagint is basically the name of the Old Testament in Greek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so we talked about when it was translated and things like this, and why does the Old Testament show up in Greek at all in the first place and stuff like that.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's the timeline on that one. And so we're talking about this Greek word, martia, and what it meant in 450 BC, which is in the 5th century BC. Is that relevant to what it meant in the 2nd or 3rd century BC? Is it relevant to what it meant in the 1st century BC? And we already had one person say, no, it doesn't. But the real sticky point is always the why. Why doesn't it matter?
Because what was going on in the 1st century BC was different than what was going on in the 4th century BC. Does that make sense?
Well, you are right. They're definitely different. But what particularly happens with language as time goes on? It changes as time goes on.
Okay.
So if I had a dictionary from 100 years ago, is it going to be current anymore?
No.
No. And that's about the same time frame difference that we have with these ones. Well, actually, we have even further gap than that.
Yes.
So it's because of the time.
It's because of the time.
It's no longer relevant because of the time lapse.
The definition is no longer relevant. They might use the same word, but the definition will have changed by then.
Yeah, I understand that because on question number 5, it was, the words that I put were gay, thong, sick. Those were some of the ones that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, now that you say it like that,
yeah.
Number 6 is shined in a whole new light. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the idea. Language changes with time. So the old dictionary doesn't apply to the new stuff, and the new stuff doesn't apply to the old stuff. If we want to understand what a particular piece of writing meant, we have to know the dictionary from its particular time, so to speak. So if we use the wrong dictionary from the wrong time period, we're not going to get it right. We're not going to understand what they actually meant.
Now I'm starting.
That's maybe not for all words, though, is it?
Well, some words aren't going to change a whole lot.
Okay.
But you always want to make sure that the information that you have is current to that time period.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Because it might not have changed, but it might have. And you don't know unless you actually look it up and make sure that you have something from that time period to compare it with. Which helps a lot. Like a lot of people who make fun of the King James, they make fun of the Old English and whatnot. And, well, that's not really a valid standard because it wasn't written in our time period. If you try to use the modern definitions for back then,
It made sense then.
it made sense then. For example, here's a great example with the King James. The King James uses the word unicorn all over the place. And people are like, oh, that's so silly. Unicorns. Those aren't real. The King James obviously got it wrong. Well, you have to look it up. In the time frame that the King James was written, what did unicorn mean? It meant rhinoceros, one-horned animal.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never seen the word in the book. That's why I'm like,
Yeah.
We had that discussion.
Yeah, it actually is. It is in there.
Yeah.
And you will find that in some of the older translations and
It's
more of the
not
traditional ones.
Unicorn's what we think of today.
right.
Yeah, the word has definitely shifted in meaning.
That is funny.
Well,
You mean there wasn't sparkly one-horned horses in the Bible?
Yeah. So yeah, people today are thinking, My Little Pony, and they're reading the King James. And it's like this is whacked, people. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about a rhinoceros.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I love it.
So yeah, you have to make sure you're using the right dictionary for the right text. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with some problems.
Yeah.
That's what problem 6 is about.
Yeah,
Sorry, sir.
With the King James Version, and I'm getting more and more used to it because I'm using it more and more, but the sentence structure
Is even different. Yeah.
is different. And you have to struggle with that when you first start getting into it. But I'm getting to love the King James Version more and more.
They kind of get the cart before the horse in some ways.
It is different.
And that's the same thing with any ancient work. We're dealing with the New Testament in its ancient form when we're talking about the Greek. And trying to interpret it through our modern lens, it's easy to make mistakes if you're not thinking, this is something that's completely different. Which also makes it really hard to understand because it's completely different.
Well, and I might be like totally off on a rabbit trail, but how quickly did these things happen? Because that compared to what we have now is very different.
It's very different, yeah.
What was the transition?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how things like that happen.
I think
just
Well,
incrementally. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times a word will kind of fade from meaning from the public eye for a little bit. And people will rediscover it and kind of put their own little twist on it and bring it back, but it's been brought back with a twist. And then do things happen.
And someone did not like the look of rhinoceroses, so they said, we're going to make them look like horses.
I know. And shiny.
Yes.
All right, so that is problem 6. Do we have any more questions about problem 6?
No. Okay, so what would be a quick way to say that?
Okay.
Instead of like 300 letters.
So, no, its meaning is not relevant because the meaning at an earlier time is not going to be relevant to a later time. Meaning will change with time.
Yeah,
Or you could just say no because meaning changes with time.
Yeah,
That would be a real quick way of putting it.
Because language changes over time and it could have changed the meaning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's perfectly fair.
Simple really has to be my way.
That is a perfectly fair way of doing it.
There we go. So I was saying it, I was just saying it very convolutedly.
Pretty much.
You're trying to go way too deep, Kim.
They're not really meant to be hard. I'm sorry if they come across that way, but it's not meant that way.
So how intelligent he is.
I know. I'm the same way. I try to just tap into your mind a little bit when I'm reading these, and
That's a scary thought right there.
I'm so far from it.
You and me both. And I'm his mom.
I know, right? Oh,
Weird people. All right, number 7. What kind of definitional factor is at play? Bob loves Mary versus Bob loved Mary.
Textual variant.
Huh?
Textual variant.
Well, it is a textual variant, but what kind?
Oh.
Morphology.
You say morphological?
Morphology. Oh, okay. Which one are we on?
On problem 7.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I like where you're going with it.
Syntax.
Why would it be syntax?
Well, actually, no, because the syntax is what switches the word.
Yeah, it's
Cat ate the bird, the bird ate the cat. Okay, never mind. I take that back.
You're fine.
What I see is present tense, past tense.
You were right about that.
The tense of the word, okay.
Okay. And one person actually got it, but then she reneged on it.
I didn't ring me on it.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so you said that it was an issue of morphology, and you would be correct.
Okay.
Morphology is the form, and it did change form.
So it is a
Loves
textual
versus loved.
variant.
Huh?
It is, in fact, a textual variant, or no?
No, it wouldn't be a textual variant, because technically a textual variant is when you have two different documents of the same text, but one says one thing and another says another. That's a historical question.
Okay.
So not applicable in this case. Yeah. So the kind of factor that is at play is a morphological factor, morphology, the form that it takes. And as Max said, specifically, it's an issue of present tense versus past tense.
Because the letter changed, that's what...
The letter's changed, yes. The form has
Making
changed.
sure I'm following.
You're right.
There we go. I was looking at the bottom of Mary this time. I was like, oh, why did I put morphology? And then I went, oh yeah, duh.
Yeah.
Love. There you go.
Yeah, loves versus loved.
Yeah.
Changed. The form has not stayed the same, so it's a morphological change.
Got it. There we go. That's why I did it.
All right, problem number 8. As long as you remember where this is to find it was actually relatively simple, but
I'm thinking more professional, and then it's like, oh wait a minute, you're a Johnson. That's what it was.
yeah. So using the lexicon of special terms that I gave you guys, so not in the interlinear, not in the compact guide, and the one that I gave you at the head of all this stuff.
In the actual word.
Yeah.
Oh, are you looking up something else?
No.
In this...
In his own one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're
I
fine.
know. That's...
I have like 1,000 different things that are out there, so yeah.
Now I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so we looked up oida. Here is oida.
I can't find it. Okay, there we go.
And then we look at the definition. It says, know for a fact, have regard for someone, have power over something through one's understanding of it. And then it says what the synonym is.
Oh,
Gnosko.
on the cinnamon.
Yeah, there you go.
I didn't write down the synonym, I wrote down the definition.
Oh,
That's-
I wrote
I
down
did
the
that
definition
incorrect.
too. Did I?
Yeah, you were supposed to be looking for the synonym.
Look up that word.
You don't have to look it up. You just know what it
Right
is.
the way it is. Oh,
Yeah.
what is it?
It's gnosko, and it means the same thing. It means no.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, a synonym means the same. Golly,
Yeah.
I'm really confused.
I mean, there's a little bit more subtlety to it than that, but basically it means the same thing.
Oh, see,
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah,
See,
same
I
here.
did
Yeah.
overthink that one, obviously.
Yeah, we were looking for the synonym, and it tells us that gnosko is the synonym.
So how do you say the synonym?
Gnosko.
Oh, you said it like 3 times.
You're fine. Yeah, gnosko.
So I can't find
Gnosko,
it on-
actually.
Right
Gnosko.
there. It's in that very same line.
Which page? Am I on the wrong page?
So look up the word know, and then it says know for a fact, have regard for someone, have power over something through someone's understanding of it. Then in brackets, it gives the synonym.
Yeah. So
It's
you look at,
highlighted.
Oh, okay.
so yeah, you look up oida, and then the definition of oida tells you that gnosko is a synonym.
Oh, there we go. I couldn't find it for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
So you wanted the synonym.
Cinnamon.
We call that the synonym.
Sorry, that's everybody.
It's all right.
I learned about cinnamon in Greek class. Turns out that in Greek class it doesn't taste as good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the little apostrophe over the omega?
That is a breathing mark.
Okay. You haven't tried this one, did you?
Yep, and we will not be covering that. There's only one breathing mark that matters, and that is the rough breathing mark, and that is not it.
Okay.
That was a rough breathing mark.
Okay.
All right, so what you're supposed to get is that gnosko is the synonym of oida.
Gotcha.
And it's interesting in, say, parallel passages in Matthew and Luke. Luke a lot of times will use oida. Well, actually, no, that's not right. Luke actually uses gnosko, but Matthew uses oida, but they use them in the exact same way. Yeah, they use them synonymously. They are technically different words, but they're using them in parallel passages to mean basically the same thing. Now I need to get back to the problems.
So that would be like the same as what we talked about last week, the 2 different words for love.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which,
Just because it's a different word doesn't mean that you translate it completely differently. It still means basically the same thing, like pop and soda.
No, that means something different.
That means something different. That's not a synonym. Yeah. All right.
He's like, sorry.
All right, so what word is synonymous with oida? It is gnosko. And then problem 9. What is it that primarily determines what a word means? Now, we've covered this like a few times.
Context.
Exactly.
Context.
You are not wrong. Yes.
That one jumped out like a snake and bit me.
I was like, I know this one. I don't have to look it up.
Yeah, whenever I want to give someone, something that's relatively easy on a test, it's like, this is the one. This is the one that they should always know coming out of this class. This I want you to know for sure. All right, so problem 9 hopefully was not too bad. It's nice to have an easy one in there somewhere. All right, so number 9, yes, was context. I like one-word answers. Those are fun. And then problem 10, why is it important to recognize that the Bible was written in normal language? This one's a little bit more involved.
I got the answer.
I have a word-for-word answer because I thought I found it in my notes. And that is because it was used to convey messages through an understanding of the whole passage. But that was just based off of...
Okay, that wouldn't be irrelevant at all. No. Yeah, when we talk in normal language, we talk as a part of a whole, and you have to have the whole in order to understand it. So that is an aspect of normal language that is very much so relevant. If you understood that, you're doing really good, because I'm not sure what I just said. But
jumping into a conversation, you don't always...
You don't know what's going on. Yeah, because there's a much broader context that is there that you have to know before you can go into it.
Backstory.
Yeah, the backstory.
Well, and this is, and I did it in a funny, I said it kind of funny, but you'll understand what I'm saying. I said, so we don't go off into Fruit Loop land trying to find some special meanings of things.
That is one way of putting it. It's not wrong. So we don't go into Fruit Loop land. That is the net effect.
You know what I'm saying when I,
you argue with that.
You're not wrong.
People that get these terms and like, oh, this is a special meaning. It's like, no, it just says this.
We talked about that in Sunday school this morning. You can dig real deep and you can make it mean whatever you're looking for it to mean, when really it's simple and it's written right there.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, a lot of people try to do that with the Bible. They turn everything into technical language, and it's like, this word technically means this thing, and this word technically means this thing. And by the time they're done, it has absolutely no bearing to what the plain meaning of the passage is anymore. It's like,
well,
okay.
You got lost in Fruit Loop land.
You got lost in Fruit Loop land. That is now going to become the standard. So now we have nice and Fruit Loop land.
I
Okay.
actually think my way, sorry guys, this is what happens.
It's funny how your way ended up like that way.
But yeah, something to that effect is what I'm looking for. Maybe not exactly Fruit Loop land, but the idea that the meaning doesn't come from getting really, 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 really close to each individual word and trying to find something special in each word. It's the whole. So, yeah. Both of where you guys went with it works, although one description is a little bit more humorous than the other, but it does work.
I love it.
All right, and then we already did problems 11 through 18 last week. At problem 19, it's a little hard to go over that in class because that was the reading assignment. Take these passages, read through them. Yeah, so that was pages 13 through 16 and 25 through 30.
We just had to study the terms too.
Which I have yet to do that on any of the weeks because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. Now I do. And I bought myself some index cards. So
flashcards are wonderful things.
I'll get on that. I'll get a man right on that. My secretary.
You're your secretary, right?
I am my secretary.
Exactly. And for those people who went through it, and I understand we don't always have time for it, but for those people that went through it, you'll actually find it somewhat useful this time because the lesson that we're going to pick up on this week actually starts using some of these terms. We don't use all of them. We don't get into degree, comparative, and superlative, but the other ones we do get into.
Okay.
Yep. Fun.
And I'm going to need lots of help on those because I was reading them.
Yeah, I don't ever like doing it by definition. I mean, it's standard, and you do need to learn the definitions at some point. And I don't know how you guys are, but for me, I always like to see it in action as much as possible. And so, and so I give you guys the definition, say, here, play with this a little bit, so you at least have the words in mind and kind of thing.
Okay.
But then, let's paint a picture. Let's actually see what this looks like. And that's what we're going to be doing here.
So you're not too worried about we don't have...
I'm not worried about you have it exactly right to start off with. I just want you to be familiar with the terms before we come to them. So you know that this actually is a word, because I have had students ask me that before. It's like, genitive isn't a word in English. Actually, it is.
You're just not used to that.
But you haven't seen it before, so that's why you don't think it is, but it actually is a word. But yeah, so it's basically just there for initial familiarity. But yes, we are going to go into it in more detail. All right, so that's the assignment from last week. We were just basically filling in the gaps from the previous time. So with that said, you guys have any questions before we go into the wonderful little quiz?
Your bonus question online, was that right?
Okay, so the question that I had online was, how many cases do nouns take on in Koine Greek? And your answer was?
5.
5. Your answer was?
Purple.
Purple.
I honestly would have gone with 5 if I was giving a serious answer, and there's absolutely no logic behind it. It was just a guess.
Well, there's one person who knows a way to cheat on these ones. What's the way to cheat? The parsing system chart that you guys have gives a bunch of titles up front, and then it gives all the things that fall underneath.
This is the noun.
Oh, 3.
So yeah. So cases, how many things are listed under case?
5.
5. Yep. So you would be right. There are 5 cases in Koine Greek.
That's right.
Yep.
You see what he did, Nick?
Okay.
Well, he didn't see the question online either.
No, he didn't.
No.
You're going to have to shoot him emails.
Keep them in the loop and update them for all you guys' stuff.
Or send him a text anyways.
Hey, Mac, where's that phone?
I know. We really need to get you connected.
Well,
It wouldn't
I
be hard
see where
once you
you
were on.
sent something,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what to do with it with this thing, so I...
Yeah, we'll have to play with it.
Yeah, we can help you with it.
We'll show you. We show you
We
things.
show you.
We're going to make you smarter than that, huh?
Yes.
Yes.
You got a job in front of you.
I need to bring Candace over and have her train you on that. She's trained us on all of our
Yes.
stuff. She can train you on that.
Candace, if you're listening to this, we have a job for you. All right, so
Lousy, but whatever.
She'll do it for sure.
all right, let's go ahead and get into the lesson then. This is lesson.
Doing the quiz?
We're going to do the quiz here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Did you have any questions before?
No.
Are you sure?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we'll get into the next lesson. This is going to be on the article, which is technically the deterministic relative pronoun, but no one ever wants to say that, so we just say the article. But it's technically the deterministic relative pronoun. Yes, ma'am?
We're not going to do our quiz from last week before we do the lesson?
We're going to do our quiz.
Oh,
It's just on the next slide.
It's on the next slide.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. There's always a title slide because I'm weird that way. Yeah.
I'm like,
So yeah, I'm just telling you a little bit about where we're going.
Okay.
Okay. I do the back and forth thing because my mind wanders, so just put up with me.
That's his ADHD.
Yep. So deterministic relative pronoun is what it's technically called, but we're just going to call it the article for short, or the DRP. And we're also going to talk about nouns, but we're actually going to talk about nouns first because that's easier. Yeah. All right, and now let's go ahead and get into the quiz. All right, number 1, any word in any language usually has blank meanings. This will seem relatively similar to something that we had last week, but it's not exactly the same. I changed one of the answers. One of the possible answers I changed. I didn't change the one that's right, but I changed one of the ones that was wrong. that would be really confusing. Yeah. So it's either 7 meanings, 2 meanings, a single meaning, or multiple meanings. Number 2, church is an example of what type of translation? And I have a traditional, or it could be a transliteration. I like number C, a bad one. D, a syntactic one.
I'd like to study that one.
Yeah.
I know what it isn't. I know which one it isn't.
And in previous homework sets, I gave you guys lists of traditionals and transliterations, and I've also told you what syntactic means, and we've also talked about bad translations as well. So hopefully in that material you'll be able to find it. You look back through your previous stuff. And then, depending on how well of notes you took or not took, well, then maybe that won't be anything. And then Question 3 could probably be a little bit confusing. She said all kinds of nasty stuff about the food is an example of what? A true universal, where this is a truly universal statement. It applies literally to everyone, everywhere, at all times. B, a said universal. What is said is universal, but it's not necessarily actually meant to be universal. And then there's C, a meant universal. It was actually meant to be taken universally. So what kind of all is used there when it says, she said all kinds of nasty stuff about the food?
Well, I don't know where she was eating.
Right, it might depend on where she's eating, right?
Sorry, that's Golden Corral.
Oh, I know.
Huh? You do.
I'd rather go to Jackpot myself.
All right, and then number 4, which is a syntactic difference? I struck the bag versus I hit the bag. I eat versus I ate. C, boys bite dogs versus dogs bite boys. And D, you can versus you might. Which is a syntactic difference?
You know, things are really starting to make sense to me. Some of these are really starting to make sense, but it's because there's repetition, so thank you.
Repetition is the mother of memory. Yep, and then the bonus. If you guys get the bonus wrong, I'm sorry, I am going to be a little disappointed because we keep covering this one, and we keep covering this one, and it was even on this one's past times homework, so that one should be fairly straightforward.
I'm going to stick. Okay, let me get these ones first. Okay, church is an example of what translation.
At online people, now we're waiting for people to fill in answers, so just hold tight and wait with us. Hopefully you're doing it on your side. But yeah, you're going to be staring at a screen for a little while. So just play along, you know. Play some Jeopardy music in the back. We're not allowed to do that because one person doesn't like it here. I don't know why he doesn't like it.
He doesn't like it?
No.
He doesn't like Jeopardy?
He does not like Jeopardy music.
You don't like Jeopardy?
No, I didn't say that.
So we can play the Jeopardy music? I'll have to remember to load that then.
I said you didn't? Wow.
Doesn't everyone just love Jeopardy music? It's no. Okay, maybe.
It's scary.
It just puts the pressure on a little, right?
Just a little, yeah.
Your little guy today, he was trying to sing We Will Rock You.
Oh, yes.
And he was singing, I can't remember the words he was doing, of course they were wrong. But that's the way my dad sings.
His dad doesn't do much singing, so that surprises me.
Yeah. It's cute.
Is it 2 that's holding you guys up?
No, I got 2.
Okay.
And I think I even got 3 now. I'm going to look at 4.
4, okay.
I've got to figure out what's syntactical.
You know what morphological was?
Mm-hmm.
It's the one that's not that.
Yeah, but what's that? Okay, here we go. Okay, so what is a syntactical difference? Okay. Okay, now I know.
One, if you looked at the quiz from last time and if you wrote down the questions, which I don't know who would unless you got really bored, but if you did that last time, you could have just looked that one up and copied the same answer.
Oh, well, I didn't think about that. I was trying to...
Yeah. Like I said, I wouldn't expect that most people would. But I did try to be somewhat easy about that one.
Which one? Number 4?
Number 1.
Oh.
Yeah, because that one was on last time's quiz.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant for number 4. Like, what?
No, not for number 4. Number 4 is a little bit more difficult. That's more recent stuff that we haven't had a chance to pound into our brains yet, so that one's still a little, yeah, what is that? But once you deal with something, 4 or 5 times, then eventually it sticks. It's just a matter of getting to that point.
Okay, now for the bonus.
Like I said, this is the one that we cover all the time. This is the one thing I want you guys to get out of this class. If you don't get anything else, get this one.
Oh, I
think I'm trying way too hard.
Yeah, don't overthink that one. It's the same answer it's always been.
That one just got overthought
Blank
a lot.
determines a Koine word's meaning.
Yep, the same thing that always determine what the word means.
Oh.
Yes.
And you could put 3 answers down, you could put 1 answer down, as long as they're all the same.
Oh, yeah.
That's, yeah, that one. Yeah, so this is a good bonus question. Don't lose
It was a good
that.
one. It made me.
Do we have enough time for me to go use the restroom?
Okay, be quick. I need to start creating a hall pass. Yes, and please do not overthink it. I know it's easy to do with this class, but try not to overthink it.
Very much so, yes.
Which is always a hard thing to do because you think, okay, now I won't overthink it on this time. And then you start overcompensating. Yeah. It's like, the letter A looks cool. I'll just go with that. I'm
Right?
not overthinking it.
Straight up guessing.
Yeah. Pretty sure that D looked at me funny. And online people, you'll be happy to know that there is not as much steam coming off of people's heads this time as we've had in past quizzes.
Truth.
Yeah. That might be because we just don't have any syllabification questions on this quiz, though.
Thank you, Jesus. Those ones go right over my head. We'll be putting the emphasis on all the wrong syllables in Greek, that is for sure.
That's okay, though. The way that we're doing it with Mounce's pronunciation system isn't absolute anyway, so hey. With dead languages, it's all kind of arbitrary. Just as long as you can communicate amongst yourselves. You know what I mean. Them there words.
He's tuning you out.
I think he is.
What's up? Who said that? All right, that's it. I'm bringing cookies next week, just saying. We need snacks in Greek class.
Yeah, that could be dangerous. You're going to get us full. All of our blood is going to rush to our bellies. And those quiz scores are there. They're going to take a nosedive right there.
Right, I'll serve them after quiz.
After quiz, that would be the way to do it right there. Yeah. And maybe a little bit of coffee to wake us up.
There you go.
Except I don't like coffee that much, but yeah.
Well, I broke some.
Kind of surprised you don't have an IV on that, but
I got an habit of doing it in my other life. But I always had donuts with it.
That's fairly stereotypical, isn't
Oh,
it?
it's standard operating procedure, and you can't operate without donuts.
all right. How close are we to being done? How many minutes would you guys say we have left? Hour and a half. Well, I don't think we have quite that much time.
1 more minute.
1 more minute? Okay, let's do 1 more minute. One more minute. And of course, the online people have a distinct advantage. They can just hit pause on this and they can stare at it as long as they want. You know?
1 more minute, click, I'm going for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
This might be a pause thing.
Yeah, you can
About
skip
30
past
seconds
go
left.
fishing and pause later.
I always had students in high school ask me if I'd make an online version of the class. It's like, I know you too well. If I make an online version of the class, you will never be here.
I wouldn't have been.
All right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see how we did. Kind of do like we did last time. On number 1, let's figure out which one was definitely the wrong answer first. So any word in any language usually has how many meanings? Which one is definitely not right there?
7.
Single.
Well, C is the one I would probably have gone for. If you say that most words only have one meaning, that would concern me a little bit. 7 would concern me too, but it only has a single meaning. That would definitely scare me. At least 7 you're thinking in terms of multiple.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that does determine A is incorrect.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so if C is definitely wrong, then which one is it that is definitely right?
D.
D.
That's what I put down.
Yes, that is safe to say. We don't know if it's necessarily going to have 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, but we know that it's usually more than 1. And so that means that by default, 7 and 2 are not going to be what we're looking for.
And see, that 7 could be one of those Fruit Loop things that I was talking about. Because people say, because 7, you know, that's a godly number, so it's got to be 7.
There's always 7 meanings to every word. If you look hard enough, you might find a meaning. It just doesn't mean it's actually a meaning. All right, 2. Church is an example of what type of translation? Let's go ahead and do it on this one too. Which one do you think is definitely not the right answer?
C.
See, I was kind of stereotypical on that one, wasn't I? Yeah.
But you didn't say there was a good one.
Well, there is a correct answer. All right, so what is the correct answer? Is church a traditional transliteration or syntactic?
I went with A.
I did too.
Yeah.
Well, you would all be correct. It is a traditional. Yeah, so it's not a transliteration and has nothing to... No, I'm not. I'm just being honest. No. This is the advantage of repetition. You'll get things eventually. All right. And then number 3, she said all kinds of nasty stuff about the food is an example of what? Is it a true universal? Did anyone pick that?
No.
You don't think that she said everything that she could have about it? No. You're probably right about that. Is it B, a said universal?
Yes.
Yeah, she used universal language. Yeah, that actually is correct.
I got that one right too.
All right, and then why is C, a meant universal, wrong?
Okay, what was the definition of the meant universal?
We didn't give a definition of a meant universal.
You gave an example.
I gave an example.
What was your example?
A meant universal is when you actually mean it for it to be universally applied.
Yeah, and that's why it's wrong, because it isn't universally applied.
Yeah.
So.
Probably they didn't say every nasty thing they could have. Yes. So A and C were actually kind of 2 different forms of the same thing.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, just using more confusing language.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Okay.
All right. Number 4, which is a syntactic difference. Let's just go through these one by one. A is I struck the bag versus I hit the bag. What kind of a difference is that?
What is it called?
Synonymous.
Yep. That is an issue of synonyms. So a synonymic difference. Struck versus hit. So if it has to do with synonyms, it's not syntactic. So that is not right. B, I eat versus I ate. What kind of a difference is that one?
That's the morphology.
That is morphology, which is still not syntax. But the form did change, but it's still not a syntactic difference. All right, C, boys bite dogs, dogs bite boys. What kind of difference is that one?
That's the syntax.
That is syntactic. Yep. We changed where they are in the sentence. Yeah, boys bite dog, dogs bite boys. Boys bite dogs would just be weird, but...
It does have?
Depends on the boy.
It depends on the boy.
I have a 5-year-old who in fact has done that.
So.
All right then. Well, he did it to me first.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. All right, and then you can versus you might. We didn't cover that one.
I was going to say, I don't remember.
Those are 2 different words and they have 2 different meanings. Mm-hmm. We didn't really cover that though. That's not really a classification that we have yet.
Antonyms.
They're not quite antonyms.
That's true.
They're not quite. But yeah, that's just not a category that we've gone over. That was I wanted to have 4, so I'll put that in there.
So what is that category?
You can versus you might. That would be ability versus permission.
I was just going to say it's a definite versus a possibility.
Yeah, at the very least.
We have covered that, kind of.
We kind of covered that a little bit when we talked about the subjunctive, but we haven't really formally gone over subjunctive yet. All right, number 5, which hopefully everyone got because we've only gone over it a million times. but it's worded differently, so I will be fair on this one. It will catch some people off guard just because it's worded differently.
It just took me a minute.
Yep. Okay, so what did you guys come up with?
Context.
Context and context. And if you're not sure, look at the context. Yeah, context. Fantastic. All right, so did any of us get at least 3 out of 4 on this one?
Well, at least.
Okay, good. We're showing improvement, people. Yay.
You got them all right.
That is not what I asked.
No, I'm sorry, the star.
You got it. We know what you're interested in now.
I missed one because I didn't fill it in. I was kind of
So the star goes to.
yeah. I got to look at it.
You got them all right, didn't you?
I did, but I got it last week. So.
All right.
Can't get it twice in a row.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is for you online people without the gold star to pass around. Because like I said, some of you are like way over in Kansas and some are in Washington. I don't know how you're going to transfer the gold star. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get into the lesson now. We are going to cover, like I said, the article and nouns. We're going to kind of do it in reverse order, though. It's easier to take it from nouns. We're going to spend most of our time here on number 1, the case basics. So we're going to do like you learn in most languages. This is how this works. And then the second one, the special functions of the cases, except when it's one of these. Now, here's the rule, here's the exception. That's basically what 1 and 2 is. 1 is this is when it behaves nice and normal. Number 2 is like this is the rest of the time that you're normally going to see in real life, but you know. Yeah. And then we'll talk about number and gender. That section will be real quick. And then the deterministic relative pronoun, that one's going to take a little bit more time. Like I said, we might not get to everything tonight, but the main one that we want to make sure that we hit is the case basics and spend most of our time there. Okay. So if it seems like I'm dragging things on, that's because I am. Because I want it to be very apparent what we're doing. All right, so any questions on the game plan here where we're going to spend the most time, what we're doing? Okay. All right, let's get into it. The case basics. Now, in order to teach you guys the case basics, I first have to tell you guys a very, very sad story. This is one of the saddest stories I know. Mommy, Susie gave my candy to Lisa.
Was it Reese's?
I think it was.
That was so sad.
This is terribly sad right here. And now, despite how sad it is, and I know that some of you are probably bursting into tears about this point, but despite how sad of a story this is, this sentence has every single case in it. Now, I'm doing this in English because it makes it easier for us to understand, but this sentence has every case in it. And I'll go ahead and show you which ones those are.
Does that happen often in Greek?
That you have every single case? No.
Oh, okay.
In most languages, in most sentences, you're not going to have all the cases.
Okay.
I picked one that had everything in it so that we could see it all together, because that's how most people understand it. If I told you just what each one was by itself, it usually wouldn't make any sense. Because we understand things in contrast. That's just the way that human brain works. All right, so mommy is in what is called the vocative case. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Susie is the nominative case. The pronoun my is what is called genitive. Candy is in what is called the accusative. And then Lisa is in what is called the dative.
How can candy be accusative?
That's what I was thinking.
Accusative, when you're talking about language, does not mean what it normally means. And the same with the other ones.
Right.
Yeah. All right, but those are the 5 cases. Now, when Mounce does his paradigms in the Biblical Greek Compact Guide, all those blue sections in the middle that have all the words in them, those are paradigms. And when you're talking about the sections that have the nouns in them, which is more so towards the beginning, the nouns, adjectives, things like that, like page 76, for example, has hagios in it. And that is an adjective, and he gives it not quite in this order. Instead, he does the N at the top on page 76 that's next to the first hagios. That's the nominative, is that little N. The G is genitive, D is dative, A is accusative, V is vocative. So we're going to use his order when we go through it.
Okay, I didn't see what you did.
And they all changed the way they're written.
Exactly.
Oh, dear.
We're not going to memorize that part of it, because that takes forever. But I'm just saying to you, this is how it matches up with him. Okay, your interlinear that you guys have will tell you what the case is and all those kinds of things, so you don't have to memorize all that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but on page 76 is a good example of how he normally breaks it down.
Is this the interlinear?
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, the one that has little parsing codes on it. Because if you didn't know the parsing codes, you would have to memorize all of the changes, which takes forever, which is why most people don't want to study Koine Greek.
Is those words changing an example of morphology?
Yes, that is a morphological difference. It's all technically the same word, it's just different forms of it.
Gotcha.
So we're going to use the order that Mounts does. So first thing we're going to start off with is the nominative. Okay, the nominative is the thing that is responsible for the action of the primary active verb of the sentence. So our verb, I've gone ahead and put it in all capital letters for us, and I'm going to try to do that throughout the lesson just to make it easy. We're asking who is responsible for the giving. If the verb is hit, it's who is responsible for the hitting. If it's drink, who is responsible for the drinking. Okay? Nominative is who is responsible if it is an active verb.
Who is verbing?
So who is?
Yeah, who is verbing? Who is the one who's responsible? Or what is responsible? Okay, so in this case, who is the one who's doing this giving? Susie. So Susie is the one that's in the nominative. We found our culprits. So if this was a police investigation, this is the suspect. Pretty much. Okay, so that is the idea behind the nominative. But like I said, this is dependent upon it being an active verb. Okay, we're going to have to discuss that as well because it changes. In fact, the nominative switches with the accusative depending on what kind of verb it is. If it's an active verb, this is the definition. If it is what is called a passive verb, then it will change out with the accusative. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. But the main thing that you have to understand is that if the kind of verb changes, then what the definition is will change as well. But I'm going to tell you when that happens. I'll put a little PAS next to the verb to tell you this is passive. Okay. And then you'll think, oh yeah, I remember that changes on that one. All right, but nominative, what you guys need to get for right now, it's who's responsible. Okay, it's who's responsible. In this case, it was Susie that did the giving. Susie is responsible. She's the guilty party. And then in the way that Mounts does it, the next thing that he lists, he'll give in any of his paradigms is the genitive. And for us, when we're translating it into English, it's usually helpful to think of it with the words of or from, which does make things a little weird because we usually think of or from and words like that as prepositions in English, but they're attached to nouns in Greek.
Okay.
Okay, and also in Greek, it follows a head noun. This is different from in English. So here's the genitive in English, and in English, it is in front of the noun that it's described. What kind of candy is it? It's my candy. In Greek, the my will be afterwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, so it follows its head noun in Greek.
So it will say, Susie gave candy Mike to Lisa?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like in Spanish how a lot of times they'll put the adjective after the noun. Okay. So instead of the blue car, it's the car blue.
Okay.
It's a lot like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is one of the few cases in Greek where syntax is actually a big deal. It's actually going to follow its head noun. It follows its head noun. And what the genitive does is it usually shows possession or derivation. In this case, it would be possessive. My is possessive pronoun. But it can also say that it's coming from. You know, this is the candy that came from me, which would be a fair way of saying that. All right, so that is the genitive. It's basically what we normally think of as a possessive. Can be a little bit different from that, but for right now, you can think of it as a possessive.
Genitive is possessive, more or less.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And it can follow pretty much any case. You can have something in the nominative that has a genitive that's after it. You can have accusative that has something that's genitive afterwards, or dative. You can even have a genitive that's followed by another genitive. It's not really a very picky case. It can follow just about anything.
Almost about anything. Okay.
Yep. But it's always behind whatever it's describing. All right, then the dative. The definition of the dative is really simple, but it's weird because of how Mount sets it up in his paradigms. The dative is actually defined in terms of the accusative. So if you can find the accusative, the dative gets whatever is in the accusative. So who got the candy? Lisa did. So Lisa's the dative. We don't know what the accusative is yet, but all that we need to do to find the dative is just figure out who got that thing. So whoever gets what's in the accusative, that's the dative.
Dative frequently gets what is the accusative. Okay, so the dative, the accusative goes along with the dative.
Yeah, the accusative goes to the dative. So if the dative is receiving what's in the accusative. So who is responsible? Susie. Who wound up getting the candy? That's Lisa. And that's the dative.
Did you make up this sentence?
Yes, I did.
Okay, just making sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Mounts is weird. He actually has like Greek sentences, but yeah.
Dative frequently gets what is in the accusative. Okay. Okay, Lisa's getting the candy.
Exactly.
Okay, there we go.
So Lisa is dative.
Okay.
All right, then if we're going to define the dative in terms of the accusative, that means we need to know what the accusative means. The accusative is the answer to the question of what or who receives the action of the primary active verb.
Sure.
Okay, so the nominative is who is responsible for the action. The accusative is what is receiving the action. So who gave? Susie. What was given? Candy.
The accusative receives the action.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So who's responsible? Nominative. What is it that's being acted on? That's accusative. Or take the verb hit, for example. If you say Bob hit Tom, Bob would be nominative. He's the one who's responsible. Tom would be the accusative because he's the one who's receiving the action.
So
Tom was the one who was hit.
Almost, from what English accusative means, it's almost the opposite, huh?
It has really no connection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then don't get that in my head.
Yeah, don't get that in your head.
It's hard not to with a word like that.
It's hard not to with a word like that, yeah.
To think that.
Yeah, not quite.
Okay.
All right, so these four cases right here are the ones that are going to show up the most often. Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. You see those pretty much all over the place in the text. Very few times do you see the vocative, and the vocative is used for direct address. So that's why mommy is vocative. This is who you're talking to. So if you're actually specifically addressing someone, trying to get their attention, making sure that they know that you're talking to them, that's vocative. So a lot of sentences are not going to have a vocative in there. Unless it's direct speech to someone. It's usually not going to have a vocative. And it's a pretty simple definition too. All right, so that's the normal order that things go in. And the way that I usually do it, when I'm starting out parsing and whatnot, I would start out by finding the verb. Then I'd ask myself, who's responsible for this? Then you get the nominative. Say who's receiving the action? That's the accusative. Who gets the thing that's in the accusative? That's the dative. And then I would look for genitive and vocatives. So verb, nominative, accusative, dative, then genitive and vocative is how I'd usually look for it.
Okay. Oh, verb. Okay, you have it written down. Okay, good.
Yep, it is in there.
Okay, verb, nominative. Okay. So that's how you first.
That's how I would suggest in going through your sentences to start off with.
Or order of finding.
Yep, order of finding.
There you go.
But here's the thing to remember. If the verb isn't an active verb, if it's a passive verb, which two are going to change definitions?
Give me an example of a...
Okay, so instead of Bob hit Tom, let's say Bob was hit by Tom. That's an example of a passive constructive.
Okay, so was hit is a different...
Is a passive form.
Passive verb, sorry.
It's a passive form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the question?
Okay, so which two are going to switch if you have a passive verb?
Oh. The ones you said.
You are not wrong. Yeah. which two are most tied to what kind of verb it is?
I didn't write it down.
It's in there,
Oh,
and I have it boxed.
Say it again.
I have it boxed.
Yeah, yeah. So the ones that are tied to the kind of verb that you have are the nominative and accusative. So if the type of verb changes, that means that these two are basically going to swap definitions.
Oh, you said that at one point too, and then said, and we'll talk about this.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about it.
Yeah, we're talking about it, yeah. Yeah. So, and the accusative will switch definitions if the verb is a passive verb. So the nominative then becomes the thing that's acted on, and the accusative becomes the thing that's responsible for the action.
Okay, just a second. Okay, we'll switch
Definitions.
to, if it is a passive verb, right?
If it is a passive verb. Now there's one of these that is based on one of those two, so it's going to wind up changing as well. Which one is that one?
Fine.
Huh?
Okay, say that again, I must have missed it.
Okay, so one of these 5 cases is based on one of the other cases. So if it's one of those other cases definitions switch, it's going to have to switch with it. Which one is defined in terms of another case?
You lost me.
Okay. Okay, so we already said that the nominative and accusative will switch definitions if the verb is a passive verb. Right. Now there is another one of these cases, either the genitive, the dative, or the vocative, that's going to have to switch as well. Because
genitive and accusative. Is that right?
No.
Genitive and dative.
No, not the genitive. The genitive isn't really tied to the verb.
Accusative and the dative.
The accusative and the dative. The dative normally goes to the accusative. But if we switch what kind of verb it is, if it's a passive verb, it is instead going to go with the nominative. Okay, so there's actually 3 of them that depend on what kind of verb it is. The main 2 are nominative and accusative, and then the dative just kind of follows along with that.
That's why finding the verb first is important.
Is important. You need to know what kind of verb you're dealing with first before you can deal with the other stuff.
So the dative will go with what if it's a passive?
It will go with the nominative instead, because the nominative and accusative switch if it's a passive verb. Okay. But to review, nominative is who's responsible, who did the giving. Genitive shows possession or derivation, so my. Dative gets what's in the accusative, who got the candy, that was Lisa. Accusative is who receives the action, so what is it that was given? The candy was given. It's accusative. Vocative, used for direct address, who are we talking to? We're talking to mommy.
Vocative is the direct.
Direct address. This is who I'm talking to.
Like Lord.
Please do this. Yes. Lord, I have a question. Lord, I have a supplication. Yes.
Lord, I'm confused.
Yes. All right, so those are the 5 cases. Let's go ahead and work through some examples, because right now it's pretty much going to be mush. That's always the way it starts off with.
It is mush. That's a good way to put it.
All right, so let's go into examples. And like I said, this is the way that I suggest you do it. With the verb, you always look for the verb first. Then you say, who's responsible for this verb? That's the nominative. Who or what is responsible for the action in this verb? Then you say, what is being acted on? That's the accusative. And then, who is it that gets this thing that's being acted on? That's the dative. Then afterwards, you can look for genitives, basically possessives, and then you can look for vocatives. Who is being addressed? Who are we talking to? All right, so this first one, what is the verb?
Built.
Built. And I did not put a little PAS on this one, so that means it's an active verb. It's a normal verb. Most verbs that you're going to find in the New Testament are going to be active. And that's why I gave you all the base definitions in active terms, because that's the one that shows up the most often.
Okay.
Even in Greek.
Even in Greek. Yep. So, we found the verb. We know that it's active because it doesn't have the little PAS on it. So now we're going to ask ourselves, who is it that is responsible for this? Who is doing the building?
Jim.
Jim. All right, so Jim is in the nominative. All right, so nominative is who's responsible. Accusative is what is it that's receiving the action. Not who's receiving the thing in the action, but who is receiving the action itself. So who built, nominative. What is built is accusative.
So granddaughter would be accusative.
No.
Sandcastle.
Did Jim build a granddaughter?
Oh, there you go.
It's tied to the verb.
Quite
It's tied,
technically, yes.
Yes.
and along, yeah, down the road, yes.
So sandcastle is the accusative?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Jim is the one who's building. The sandcastle is the thing that's built. Now you'll see that I put up two accusatives there.
Because of A goes with sandcastle.
A goes with sandcastle. So articles, adjectives, some pronouns, we'll get into that later. But articles and adjectives will usually wind up going with a particular noun, and they will have the same case.
Why, okay, maybe I'm being silly here, but so then why was my different? My candy.
Because my is its own case.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's genitive.
It's genitive. It's its own thing in Greek.
Okay.
It has a few other uses, and we're going to talk about those later on, but it winds up
That's fine.
being a different thing.
Crossed my mind when you
Yeah,
mentioned
no,
it.
that's a fair question, yeah. And that's why I said it works with some pronouns, not all of them.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so determiners, articles, adjectives, and some pronouns, they'll get the case. But genitives, though, has its own case, so it doesn't follow that rule. All right, so we have the verb. We have the one who is doing the verb. We have the thing that is verbed. So who built, what was built, we have that covered. Now we need the dative. And the dative gets what's in the accusative most of the time. So who is it that is getting the sandcastle?
Granddaughter.
The granddaughter.
So that is the dative, right?
That is in the dative. All right, so I found the main verbal sequence. Verb. Who's responsible? What is it that the action in the verb is accomplishing? Who got the product of all of this? I have the verbal sequence. That part is done. Now I can go back through and I can look for genitives and vocatives. Okay, let's go through and look for genitives first.
Is it in the next one?
No, we're still on this one.
Oh, okay. I'm
Is
sorry.
it his?
His, yeah.
Okay.
Whose granddaughter is it? It's his granddaughter. Shows possession there. Or derivation, you could put. That would be an accurate way of doing it as well.
Genitive is, oh, there it is. Okay, what does derivation mean?
Derivation means that it comes from.
Comes from.
Yeah.
So, I wish that other sentence was up there because, oh, it is up there. It's on my page. Okay, never mind.
You're fine.
Does the genitive and the nominative normally go together? Did we already cover that?
No,
Okay.
no. The genitive can go with just about anything.
But in this case, it does go with.
No, in this case it actually goes with the dative.
Yes.
That's what the his is describing.
Oh.
Yeah, it's his granddaughter.
Okay.
What kind of granddaughter is it? It's his granddaughter. Yeah, and in Greek, this his would normally be after granddaughter.
Okay. So
That was,
we
we
did talk
discussed
about it
that.
a little bit.
Yes, we did. Yeah, it's in Greek that it's afterwards. In English, it's usually in front.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Greek it would be Jim built granddaughter his, which is a strange sentence.
Well, it reminds me of something that should be put in parentheses.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
his.
yes.
You know?
Yeah. And so that's something that you guys are going to have to remember when you do translation is that genitive, it's always going to be out of order. So you're either going to have to come,
It will always be out of order.
it will always be out of the typical English order because it's always going to come afterwards, which we don't do in English.
Okay,
And which is why you usually have to use the words of or from. So I could say, Jim built the granddaughter of him to put it in the proper order for Greek, which is still really awkward English though.
Yeah.
But it makes more sense.
Yeah, but that would be the Greek order. All right.
So the genitive will be out of order in the Greek.
Yes, it always comes after the noun that it describes. Yeah, it always follows its head noun in Greek. In English, it usually precedes its head noun. In Greek, it follows its head noun.
After the head now.
Yeah, it always comes after its head noun. All right, and then we have one last case to look for, and that is the vocative. Who is it that we're telling the story to? Bob. So Bob is in the vocative.
All of these.
Yeah. So to recap, we looked at the verb. Verb was active, so everything's nice and neat. So we ask ourselves, who's responsible for this action? Who is it that built? Well, that was Jim, so that's nominative. What did he build? That's accusative. That was the sandcastle. Who got the thing that was built? That's the accusative. Then we looked for possession or derivation. We got the genitives. Then we asked ourselves, who is the story being told to? That's the vocative. All right, so questions on G.
Did you make up that sentence too?
No. I got lazy.
That's all right.
Yeah, I get lazy really quick. Yeah. NES people online, the smoke has come back.
So this sentence has all of them, all the cases in it also.
Yes.
And so does H and so does I?
I can't remember if I does.
Okay.
I think it does. I try to include as many as possible in it so that you could see everything. But yeah, normally most sentences do not have all cases in them, unless you have a fairly complicated sentence. Because you could have a really simple sentence. You could say, I ate, which would have a nominative and the verb, and that would be it. Who's responsible for the eating? That was me. I. Yeah. And that's all that's in the sentence. I ate, so you're done.
You ate. Great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's another one. All right, so let's go on to H then. We're going to do the same thing. We always look at the verb first because we need to know if it's active or if it's passive. If it's active, everything is nice and neat and normal. Passive, nominative, and accusative will switch, which means the dative will switch as well.
Okay,
so we look at this one.
In this case, no, it is active.
It is active, correct. Yeah, I didn't put the little PAS on it, so it is active. Everything's going to be nice and neat. So when I look at the nominative, what am I looking for? The verb is brought. What do I ask myself about the nominative?
responsible for the action.
Who's responsible for the action?
Who's responsible for it? So how would I say that?
Sammy and Maria's girl?
The girl.
Or just girl?
Girl, you're right.
That was tricky.
That was
Yeah.
the nominative, right?
Yeah, that would be the nominative. Now, why can't we put Sammy and Maria is in there?
Because that just explains who she is.
Well, we did that with the A and the accusative, right?
Yeah. But these are actual.
They're pronouns.
They're nouns.
No, that has nothing to do with it. This is the one case that normally describes things, but it gets its own case.
I can't remember that one.
The genitive. Sammy and Maria's is showing possession. So normally,
His granddaughter.
like his
Sammy
granddaughter.
and Maria's
Girl, yeah.
So Sammy and Maria is the genitive because it's
Showing possession or derivation.
showing possession or derivation.
Okay. Now, normally we would take something like Sammy and Maria's girl, everything that's describing the same thing, we'd normally put them all in the same case. But when it comes to possessives, they get their own case, so we'll worry about that later. That's the only reason why we're not including them in the nominative, is because they get their own case. But normally you'd be right. If it's all describing the same thing, it normally all has the same case.
So if it would have said, "Sir, the girl brought him food," or "a girl," then it would be the.
Then it would be nominative.
Okay.
Yep. The girl would be nominative.
Or that girl, would that be?
That would be as well.
Okay.
Yep. It's just the genitive ones that you have to watch out for.
So.
Genitive is its own thing. Yep. All right, so we got the nominative. It's who's responsible for the verb. Next thing that we look for is the accusative, and what's the question that we ask ourselves there?
Who's guilty?
No.
Say that again.
So we've already looked at the nominative. That was who is responsible for the action of the verb. What's the accusative?
Receiving the action.
Who's
receiving the action?
Who's receiving? What is the who or the what that is receiving the action?
Oh, him.
So we asked who brought. Now we're going to ask what was brought.
Oh, food. Okay.
Food. You got it right the first time.
Confused. Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
So the food is the accusative.
Yeah. So who brought? What was brought?
Okay, so that's the accusative. The food is the accusative.
Food is in the accusative. Girl brought food.
Girl brought food. We need a better word for that.
I know, it's still throwing me off.
It is me too. Okay.
I know, that's right.
Yeah. So have girl brought food, and then for the dative gets what's in the accusative. So who got the food?
Him.
Him.
That's the dative, right?
Yep, that is the dative. So, girl brought food to him.
I know what sir is.
Let's look for the genitive first.
Oh, we already got the genitive.
I wrote it down too, but we were only doing it because
Okay, yeah.
I said it.
Okay. Okay. So what are going to be the possible genitives here?
Sammy and Maria.
Yeah. We do not include the conjunction and.
Okay.
Okay. So don't make sure you don't do that.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Conjunctions do not get a case. They are caseless.
they're just on their own?
They are on their own.
Just do their own thing?
Yeah. Conjunctions, prepositions, things like that. They're on their own.
Not get a case, right?
Yep. They do not have a case. Yeah. So we have something that's showing possession here. Sammy and Maria's girl. That's going to be the genitive, and then the genitives. You are correct. And then finally, what is the vocative? Sir. Yeah. Vocative is not always someone's name. It can be a term of address. When you're speaking to someone, that can be vocative as well.
So if you said dear Lord, would both be vocative?
It can depend on how they form the dear, because sometimes genitive can wind up in doing weird things in Greek.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, but normally you would be right. Yeah.
So
whatever's a part of that term of address would usually be.
So if I say you go sit over there, would you be the vocative in that case?
You could say it that way.
Okay.
You could also say, I want you to go sit over there, in which case it's not a vocative anymore.
It changes.
Because
You're not using it as a direct address anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not labeling that person you anymore.
What if I said, hey you? That hey would be something else then, right?
Well, that's the same.
That would be more like an interjection. You're getting someone's attention.
Oh, okay. Oh, so it wouldn't be the okay.
Yeah. All right. So to recap, we found the verb. It was active, so everything's normal. We asked who's responsible for this verb. Who is doing the bringing? The girl is. What did she bring? That's the accusative. Who did she bring it to? That's the him. We looked through and we found things that were possessive. Sammy and Maria's girl. We don't include conjunctions in that. And then we said, who is being addressed? Sir. All right. Are we ready for I?
Sure.
I. All right. What is going to be the big thing with I just by looking at the verb there?
Because you know it's passive.
It's passive. So which two do we automatically know get switched?
Nominative and accusative.
Yep. And if they get switched, what else is going to have to switch because it's based on them?
The dative.
The dative. So the dative normally gets the accusative. Now it's going to get the nominative.
Okay. So this is a passive.
Okay.
Now we're still going to look for things in the same order, but we understand that the definitions are reversed. So we're still going to look for the nominative first.
Okay, so was stolen is the verb, right?
Yes, was stolen is the verb.
Okay.
All right, and we're going to look for the nominative now. The nominative is usually the person or thing that's responsible, but this time it's going to be what?
Number 86.
It's going to be the accusative.
No.
It's going to be the accusative now. It's going to be the thing that's receiving the action. So instead of who did the stealing, it's now what was stolen.
Oh, home.
Home.
Oh.
Yeah.
So home is the
Home is the nominative now. In a normal sentence with an active verb, it would be the accusative. But since we have a passive verb, that switches everything around.
Okay.
So now that becomes the new nominative. But it has the same definition as the accusative normally would have. The way that I like to remember it, I don't know if it'll help you guys out, but the way I like to remember it is basically knowing what is emphasized in the types of verbs. In an active verb, the emphasis is on the doer. In a passive verb, the emphasis is on the done.
It was.
Okay.
Basically, what was done, yes. So it's a matter of emphasis. The nominative is always the thing that's emphasized by the verb. If it's an active verb, It's the doer that's emphasized, so the doer is nominative. If it's a passive verb, it's what was done that is emphasized, so that's the nominative there. What does each type of verb emphasize? That's always going to be the nominative.
Okay, so active verb is the doer, passive verb is the done, what was done.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right, and then we'll go ahead and we'll look for the accusative now, but this is a passive verb, so it switches.
So who is responsible for the action?
Yes, now it's who is responsible for the action, so who was that?
Number 86.
Exactly.
Oh, I knew it was something.
Yep.
That will be the accusative.
That will be the accusative this time. So what was stolen? Home. That's the nominative with passives. Who did it? That's the accusative with passives. And then the dative now is the one who gets the thing that's in the nominative. So who is it that gets home?
The dative gets what?
Since we have a passive verb, the dative goes from getting what's in the accusative to getting what's in the nominative, because nominative and accusative switched. So the dative now gets what's in the nominative.
Wow.
I have to like really think about these things. And look back at the other examples.
Yeah. So the dative gets what's in the nominative. So who is it that's getting home?
Team.
The team, yeah. You are right. The team is the one that is getting home.
So there then becomes the genitive.
You are right.
What's
There.
for? What's for?
For is a preposition.
So it's nothing.
It's nothing.
It's a floater.
It's a floater. Yeah, most of the helping words are not going to get case. Yeah, and just is also going to be one of those floaters.
Okay, so it would be home was just stolen by number 86 for number 86's team, is basically what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there we go. That's where my brain was. Okay.
Is by also a floater?
Yep.
Okay.
And then there is the genitive.
There is the genitive. That is correct. And then the only thing we have left is the vocative. Who are we talking to?
That one's easy. The catcher.
The catcher. The catcher. All right. So, to review, going back to G, the verb was built. Nice, normal verb. So everything is going to have its normal definition. The first thing we ask is, who is responsible for this building? It's Jim. What was built is the next question. A sandcastle is what was built. So both the A and the sandcastle get the accusative. Then who is it that got the sandcastle? That's the thing that's going to be in the dative. Granddaughter got the sandcastle. Then we look for genitives, things that show possession. His granddaughter, so his is genitive. Then vocative, who is being addressed? It was Bob. On H, our verb was brought. Nice normal active verb. Everything has its normal definition. We ask ourselves first, who's responsible? That's the emphasis of an active verb, is on the doer. So who is doing the bringing? The girl is. So the girl is the thing that's nominative. What did she bring? She brought food. That's the thing that's in the accusative. Who did she bring the food for? Him. That's the thing that's in the dative. And then I look for genitives. Sammy and Maria are both being used genitively regarding the girl. It's Sammy and Maria's girl. So they both get genitive. The and does not because it's a conjunction. And then last but not least, we say, who are we talking to? That's the thing that's in the vocative, so it's sir. I is weird. Well, that's true too.
I is weird.
Yes, I am.
It's also improper grammar.
Pretty much. It's weird on a number of levels. But in I, we have a passive verbal construction. And in passive verbs, the emphasis is on what is done versus the doer. So the nominative and accusative switch. So instead of starting off by asking ourselves, who is it that did the stealing, we start off with what the passive verbs emphasize, and that is what was done. What is it that was stolen? Home. And then we can ask the question that we normally would, which is who's responsible? It was number 86. And then we say, okay, who is it that got the thing that's in the nominative now? Because nominative and accusative switch, so that means that dative switches. So who got home? It was the team that got home. Then we look for genitives like we normally do. There, so is possession. Who are we talking to? That's the vocative. That was the catcher.
Okay. Dative. We go with the nominative.
If it's a passive verb.
Passive verb.
Yeah.
That's what I have to remember. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to be the biggest thing, is if you can, guys, remember what the nominative and the accusative is in the different types of verbs, you'll be okay, because everything else flows from that. Okay. It's just remembering which one's which in which case.
Okay.
All right, so any questions about G, H, and I?
No.
No.
No, but the next one looks hard.
It's not that bad. Okay, but let's just take a few seconds to take that in. A little bit of a breather here. Relax before we actually try to apply it. And those people who are online have an advantage because they can pause this as much as they want and they can go back and hit it as much as they want. Here we actually have to take time for
The
it.
disadvantage to listening online, because I've done it because I missed a few classes, is that you can't ask questions.
It's really hard to ask a
It's
computer
really
screen.
hard. Because a couple times I really wanted to.
It's really hard to ask a computer screen questions. I mean, you can.
Well,
It's
yeah.
just not going to answer back.
Just shoot him a text.
I know, I seriously almost did a couple of times, but I was like, I'll just ask in class. And,
Yeah. Messenger works.
Yes.
I can be got a hold of through Messenger. It might take me a little while to respond because I'll be out on the road somewhere, but Messenger does work. All right. Yeah, let's take one more minute because my brain's still kind of fried and I already know this stuff. So if that's the case, it's going to be the case with you.
I did good on G and H when you got to the I because it was switched around. And I do have the dyslexia, so then I went, whoa.
Yeah. Passive verbs are killers. Yeah, luckily, most of the verbs you guys will encounter will not be passive verbs. Except in this homework set, I did like every other one. But yeah.
So we won't deal with passive verbs much in Greek, that's what you're saying?
Not normally.
Okay,
but for your homework, I picked it so there's basically every other, so that you guys will get used. It will happen, and I don't want you guys to come up with something really weird. Yeah.
Well, we probably will.
Well, that happens too.
Okay, is has been stolen, is that passive too?
Where's the emphasis? Is the emphasis of the verb on the doer or the done?
No, I'm just saying, if it has been stolen, that would still be passive, right?
Where's the emphasis? Is it on the doer or the done? Where am I drawing attention? Am I drawing attention to what has been stolen, the done?
Yes.
Or am I drawing attention to who did it?
The done.
It's to the done.
Oh,
So that would still be passive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. That's right, we wrote that down, didn't we?
Yeah.
I did.
You were done, there we go.
Yep. That's where the emphasis is. Yeah, wherever the emphasis is, that's where the nominative is. Then the accusative is the other one.
And that's what I gotta get out of my head is what we.
Yeah, could we just change that word?
Is not.
I'm sorry, but it kind of doesn't work that way.
Just morph it.
Yeah, morph it, yeah. Well, throughout your interlinear, it keeps using the A for accusative and everything, so you're still going to have to deal with it.
When we're going through the Greek alphabet, you can't look at those symbols as what we learn in English. We've got to disassociate ourselves.
Right, exactly.
So that's what I have to do with that word, you know.
It doesn't mean what you think it means at all.
It is Greek. It really is.
You are completely right on that. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to an actual Greek example. We finally get to the point where we can actually do some translation now, so this is actually a good thing. Excuse me. So this is our Greek sentence. the first word there has a true forward apostrophe in front of it, so it's going to have an H sound. And that is a capital eta, so A. So, A.
Hey.
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 Hey, you. No, that's not what that means. No, it's a different word, but it does sound like that.
That's a Greek word.
So, hey. Next word, gamma, upsilon, nu, eta, g, u, n, a, gune. Hey, gune.
But that would be gune, but you've got that apostrophe.
That is not a forward apostrophe. That's a breathing mark.
That throws me off every time.
Yeah, the only time where you guys need to worry about breathing marks is if the word itself starts with a vowel and it has a forward apostrophe next to that vowel. Otherwise, you don't need to worry about the breathing marks at all. Okay. Don't worry about it. Okay. All right, so hey gune.
Hey gune.
Hey gune.
Hey gume.
Gune.
Gune. Okay, that's it.
Eta, yeah. Hey gune.
Hey gune.
Then the next word, sigma, omicron, upsilon. That's a diphthong there, so that's su. Hey gune su.
Hey gune su.
Then the next word is the verb, and that's why I set it off in the little angle brackets.
I'm just going to ask what the little L meant.
Yeah, angle brackets. So that word is gen ne se. Gen ne se. Next word has another diphthong in it with a true forward apostrophe above it. So the upsilon iota is a diphthong and has a forward apostrophe, and that is huion. Huion. I know that one's a hard one to remember. Huion.
Huion. Okay.
Yep, huion.
Huion.
And then the final word also has a diphthong in it, omicron iota, oi. And so put the sigma in front of that, and it's soy. So we have hey, gune, su, gen, ne, se, huion, soy. We have no idea what that means, though, so we're going to need more information. So, if this was in the interlinear, you'd have all the little number codes, and you could look up the number codes, and you could get some basic definitions. That's what I'm giving you guys here. These are basic definitions. Hey is basically the Greek article, we'll call it the. It doesn't always mean that, but here it means the. In this sentence it does. In this context, it's a big thing. In this context, the. Gune, we'll say, means wife. It can be a more general term for woman. In this context, it means wife, though. Su, its basic meaning is you. Gene se is the verb will bear. And you notice I did not put the little pas on this one, so this is not a passive verb. This one's active. It's going to behave nicely for us. Huion, its basic definition is son. Soy also means you. Its basic definition is you.
Say that. Oh, so soy and
su.
Su.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the first one is su. The second one is soy.
Is that a morphological?
That is a morphological change. Yeah. Same root word, but it's been changed depending on how it's being used in the sentence. So those are the basic definitions. To know how it all fits together, though, we need the cases. All right, so we have some things that are in the nominative, something that's in the genitive, something that's accusative, something that's dative.
But this is going to be kind of mixed up a little because it's Greek.
It's Greek, right.
So it's not going to make sense like it did in our English sentences.
Exactly. We're going to have to make it make sense. Okay. All right, so we're going to start off with the verb just like we did with our English sentences. Will bear. So we got the verb, and then we're going to look for the nominative next, and we're saying that's the thing that's responsible for the bearing. So who is responsible for the bearing here? The wife. The wife will bear.
But that is normally, okay. That is not normally a preposition. Oh, never mind. That is an article.
Yeah, that is an article. Yep. So the wife will bear. The wife will bear. So we know who's responsible for the bearing, and what is being born. That's the thing that's in the accusative. Son. So the wife will bear a son. Okay, so the wife will bear a son. And then, who is she bearing the son for? You. So the wife will bear a son for you. And then we go through and we look through our genitives and vocatives. Do we have any genitives?
Well, apparently, but it doesn't make sense to me because
it's in the weird order, right? But what does that genitive go with? What's its head now? Wife. So it is the wife of you will bear a son for you.
So why is one dative and one genitive?
Because one is being used to show possession, the other one is being used to indicate final outcome.
Because in Greek, wife you instead of your wife.
Exactly.
That's why.
Yeah, so the wife of you, we would normally say your wife will bear a son for you. But in Greek, it's the wife of you will bear a son for you.
That's where you, okay, there we go. That's right.
Yeah, and when you guys first start off with translation, I suggest that when it comes to genitives, you use the word of so that you can keep it in the same order and you can get used to that because that's how you'll see it. Okay. And the dative, you can usually think of with the words to or for. And then last but not least, the A here for the son, there was no article before the son. But we had to put it in just for it to make sense in English because if you said the wife of you will bear son for you, that's not exactly good English. So we had to put in an article to smooth it out.
So what you're saying is this is kind of how it happened when we translated from Greek into whatever language came after Greek, because I'm assuming it wasn't English.
It would have been Latin next.
Okay. So what you're saying is they threw that article in there for it to make sense.
Well, any language that you translate from the Greek, you're going to have to do whatever makes sense in that language.
Oh, okay.
In
So
English, we have indefinite articles
So
that we put in.
In English.
Yeah. Yeah. Other languages don't necessarily have definite or indefinite articles, so it doesn't really matter. And in Greek, they don't have an indefinite article. So to them, it would be normal to say the wife of you will bear son for you. To them, it would be perfectly normal, but it doesn't make good sense in English, so we have to add it in for it to make sense. Yeah, so in your translations that have the little italic words for words that were put in, the word a should be italicized much more often than it usually is.
In your Bible? In the Bible?
In a Bible, yeah. Yeah. Not all Bibles do the italics thing, though, for added words.
So A is an added word.
We have to add it in because in English it's really weird to say the wife of you will bear son for you.
Sounds very caveman-ish.
Very caveman-ish.
You know.
Right.
Yeah. But this is actually the thing with a lot of languages. A lot of languages do not have much in the way of articles. So when they learn English, the article just doesn't click for them because they don't have it.
Well, I notice it.
So they don't
actually,
mention
in
it.
Sign language. It's the same with sign language. They wouldn't say a son. They would just say
Son. Yeah.
And it makes sense to them because
Yeah,
there isn't a sign for a. Besides
whatever you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of languages are like that. To make it make sense in proper English, we have to put it in just to make sure that it doesn't sound cavemanish. But for a lot of languages, that's perfectly normal. All right, so yeah, so what this says is the wife of you will bear a son for you. All right, so any questions about that one? Okay.
This is something I'm just going to have to go over and over and over to get it.
And over and over and over, yep. Yeah.
The name is you.
So quick recap, we found the verb first, nice normal verb, it was active. We said who's responsible for the action, that's the nominative, so the wife will bear. The wife will bear what? Son. So the wife will bear son. Who is this for? That's the dative, you. The wife will bear a son for you. And then we also have a genitive in there. It is describing the wife, so it's the wife of you will bear a son for you.
Yeah, that could have been, not hearing your explanation, the wife, you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it could, in my mind, it should be taken that way too.
Yeah.
The wife, comma, you, should be talking to me.
Yeah. But this one's genitive, so you usually understand it with the word of or from.
Okay, so that is how you translate it out, but if you were to say it in proper English, you would say, your wife bore,
Not bore.
will bear a son for you.
Yeah. Or your wife will bear you a son.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. But don't do that just yet. Try to keep the Greek form as much as you can right now so you don't confuse yourself.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, use the of, use the a, use the for. Put in all those helping words. Try to keep the order as much as you can so that you guys know what's going on.
Okay.
Okay. This is not an NAV translation committee.
You're making it make sense for us now.
Trying to.
We'll learn other things later.
Yeah. You guys can work on stylistics later. That's what you guys are talking about, is making it good English style.
Okay.
Don't worry about good English style right now. Make it an accurate translation first.
I mean, could you imagine being a translator? Like, we're just doing one sentence at a time and it's taking forever. I can't even imagine what it was like to be a translator of the Bible, period.
It's
Tedious work, yeah.
Tedious work.
Yeah.
That's why they have actually.
Yeah, this is why when Joseph Smith says that he translated the Book of Mormon in less than a year, I don't believe it.
No. Because they actually have teams of people translating.
Yeah, they usually have one set of people working on one group of books, another set of people working on another set of books,
Yes.
eventually bringing it all together.
So like John said, I don't know if you heard, Joseph Smith said he translated the whole Bible.
Book of Mormon.
The Book of Mormon.
In about a year.
In about a year.
Who?
Joseph Smith.
Oh.
And it's like, we just did this.
Just picked apart one sentence.
And it takes forever, yeah.
15 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, he was not actually a translator.
He was not a translator. And then, like we've said, to make a translation of the Bible, it takes teams of people. A
Because
team
they kind
per
of have
book.
to, like, what would be the word I'm looking for? Like, check each other's work,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, there's comparison, there's usually a lot of group work, and then they usually have stylistic people come through once all of that is done and make sure that everything meshes together and sounds good in English.
Sounds good, but still keeps.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Or keeps the literal.
Yes.
Well, it doesn't always. There's always a balancing act between an accurate translation and something that actually makes sense in English.
Yeah.
You're never going to have a perfect balance between the two.
Just gotta find what works.
So yeah, if you make it flow nice and neat in English, chances are you're going to lose a little something in translation. But if you make it nice and accurate, nobody talks that way, so no one's going to understand what you're saying anyways. So
We have the caveman Bible.
yeah, basically.
We need to keep.
But we could work on that.
All right, let's try this next sentence here.
CC Caveman Bible.
Sorry.
PCC Caveman Bible. All right.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Okay.
All right. We do not have the rough breathing mark on the next word. That is two breathing marks, so that's not the rough breathing mark. And it's going the wrong way. The first apostrophe is a backwards apostrophe, not a forward.
So that's noha.
Noha. Noha, yes. So that word is anthrope. 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 Then we have the verb. I set it off in the angle brackets. Atheontai. Atheontai.
Tie. Okay, a second. On tie. Okay.
Yeah, atheontai. And we've already seen this word before. Soy. And this next one is a diphthong, and it does have a rough breathing mark. So this one is hi. It doesn't actually mean hi, but it's hi. Hi. And then we have another rough breathing mark. So instead of it's ha. So hamarti, because that's another diphthong on the end. Hamarti. And then we've seen this one before too.
Oh, what is this?
Su. Yep. So anthrope atheontai soy hi hamarti su.
What you guys online can't see is John dancing while he's saying the word.
Just in case you were wondering what that looked like. All right, but having the Greek words by itself doesn't mean a whole lot. So if we saw this in our interlinear, we'd have to look up all of those numbers underneath to get basic definitions, and magically they appear on the screen. I love doing it on screen. It's a whole lot easier. Don't worry, in your homework I gave you some helping definitions as well. All right, so anthrope, its basic definition is man. Atheontai, are forgiven, and that one's passive. Yeah, so we're gonna have to think on this one, guys. So we have a passive verb, but soy, like it did before, the basic meaning is you. Hi, this one means the, kind of. We're going to use that as the contextually appropriate definition. This is another one of the articles. The article has lots of different forms. It has like 17 different forms. If you guys try to memorize it, you'll be sitting there for a while. And then hamarti is plural for sin, so it's sins. We'll discuss plural later. And then su, again, its basic meaning is you. That still doesn't tell us where everything goes in the sentence, though. We need the cases. So man is in the vocative. You is in the dative. The first you is in the dative. The is nominative, the sins is nominative, and then the final you is genitive. Now we have to figure out what it means. All right, we start off with the verb, are forgiven, and it's passive. So where's the emphasis going to be with this kind of a verb? On the doer or the done?
The done.
The done. So we're saying, so we're going to start off by asking ourselves, what is forgiven? Not who's doing the forgiving.
The sins.
The sins, right. The sins are forgiven. Okay, so the sins are forgiven. That's where the emphasis is. And next, we would look at the accusative for being the thing that's responsible. Do we have an accusative in this sentence? No. So does it tell us who's responsible for doing the forgiving? Mm-hmm. Nope, it doesn't. But we know what's forgiven. The done. The sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
We don't know by who. We just know that the sins are forgiven. Okay, so the sins are forgiven. Now, do we know who this is done for?
You.
You. That's the dative. So the sins are forgiven for you. The sins are forgiven for you.
So man, the sins are forgiven for you.
We're not quite done yet.
Oh, sorry.
So we got the verb. It's a passive, so the emphasis is going to be on the done. That's what we look for first. What was done? What it was forgiven? It was the sins that were forgiven. There was no accusative to look at. And that happens with passive verbs. A lot of times with passive verbs, there will not be an accusative. They won't tell you who did it. They'll just tell you what was done. And then we said, who was this done for? That's the dative. And that was you. Now we need to look for the genitives and the vocatives. We do have a genitive over on the right-hand side there. And what is the head noun for that genitive?
You.
No.
Man.
No. Genitives always follow their head noun. So what is right in front of it?
Oh, sins.
Sins. So genitive we usually understand with the word of. So it's the sins of you are forgiven for you.
Oh,
That got lost in my mind.
You're fine.
got lost in translation.
Got lost in translation.
So the sins of you are forgiven for you. And then finally the vocative, who are we talking to?
Man.
A man. So man, the sins of you are forgiven for you.
Caveman.
We need to make that transition.
I know, it would be fun. I mean, Mac has his pirate translation. We could have a caveman translation.
Which one would you rather take? All right, so recap. We looked at the verb. It was passive. So the emphasis is on what is done, not who's doing it. So when we look at the nominative, we're looking at what is done. So what is being forgiven? The sins. And then we would ask ourselves next, who is responsible for forgiving these sins? Well, there is no accusative here, so that ends that. But we can say, who are these sins being forgiven for? That's the dative. That's being forgiven for you. And then the genitive, you, over there on the right-hand side, that follows the sins. So whose sins are they? It's your sins, the sins of you. The sins of you are forgiven for you, and who are we talking to? Man.
So it could be said as, man, your sins are forgiven.
It's not usually how it would be translated. Be, man, your sins are forgiven you, to get the dative in there.
Oh.
Your sins are forgiven you.
You need both to balance it, basically, right?
You would need to represent the dative somehow.
Okay.
In English, we would usually take it as being more so implied, but if you wanted to have an accurate translation, you need to have that other you in you.
Okay.
You in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, your sins are forgiven you. For you. Which is why I like having the word for in there, so you know what it's going for.
So for is the floater. That's the, we're throwing it in there to make it, it's like the A.
Basically.
We're making it make sense.
Yeah. It's what helps us understand that this is a dative and correctly interpret that. And then the genitive is the of. And this time we didn't have to add any extra articles because this actually makes somewhat decent sense in English without it.
Okay, what is oven for?
Of goes with the genitive.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then the for goes with the dative.
Okay, for goes with...
Oh, it was the same as the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Of you, for you.
Yep.
Of you, for you.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, for goes with dative and of
Goes with genitive.
goes with
Fantastic.
Yeah, this one was.
All right, and we don't really have a whole lot of time to get into the other stuff, which is just fine. I wanted the first section to take the most time anyways. So let's talk about homework that we can do with what we have. Okay, let's see here. Problem 1 you should be able to get. 2, 3, and 4 you will not be able to get. So problem 1 you can do. Problems 5 through 14 you can do. And let's just do that. So 1 and 5 through 14. So 1 and 5 through 14.
I can already tell I'm gonna need help. I only looked at one.
Yeah, so problem 1 and problems 5 through 14. And then next week we can handle all the little particular stuff, but if we can get the main stuff down, we'll be in good shape.
Okay, so this is just good at 5 through 14. It's just going to practice what we just did, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that should actually be fairly, I mean, not easy.
It's not going to be easy, but
we've got the information.
you've got some information that you can work with.
There's gonna be steam involved.
Yes.
There's going to be steam involved, yes.
Boy, honey, I'll tell you.
Stick my head in the oven. So
I know.
no, I'm thinking the problem is it's electric oven. It's gonna get hot.
All right, and yeah, none of the really the later stuff really applies, so that will be, I think, more than enough to get us thinking.
Yeah, 5 through 14 looks like plenty of
Plenty.
for this week.
All right, so let's call that good. See you online, people.